Have you ever wondered why certain people seem to trigger an almost violent reaction in narcissists? Why some individuals can walk into a room and immediately make a narcissist's mask slip, their carefully constructed facade crumbling like paper in the rain? Well, if you've ever witnessed a narcissist's meltdown when confronted by someone who refuses to play their games, someone who sees right through their manipulation with cold, calculated precision, then you've probably encountered the narcissist's greatest nightmare. A logical thinker, specifically an INTJ. Today, we're diving deep into the psychological warfare that happens when these two personality types collide. And trust me, it's not pretty for the narcissist. We're talking about a clash that goes beyond simple disagreement or personality differences. This is about fundamental incompatibilities that strike at the very core of how narcissists operate in the world. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why narcissists fear logical people so intensely, why INTJ in particular pose such a threat to their carefully constructed reality, and most importantly, how you can use this knowledge to protect yourself from narcissistic manipulation. But first, let's establish what we're really dealing with here. When we talk about logical people, we're not just talking about someone who's good at math or enjoys puzzles. We're talking about individuals who approach life through a lens of systematic reasoning, evidence-based thinking, and objective analysis. These are people who naturally question assumptions, demand proof for claims, and refuse to accept information simply because it's presented with emotional intensity or social pressure. INTJ represent the pinnacle of this logical approach to life. They're the architects of the personality world, building their understanding of reality brick by methodical brick, always checking their work, always refining their models of how things actually function. They don't just think logically, they live logically. Every decision is filtered through their internal framework of rationality and long-term strategic thinking. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Narcissists operate in a completely different universe. Their reality is built on shifting sands of emotional manipulation, gaslighting, and the constant need for external validation to prop up their fragile ego structure. They create elaborate fantasies about themselves and the world around them, and they desperately need others to participate in these fantasies to maintain their psychological stability. The problem arises when these two worlds collide. Imagine you're a narcissist who has spent years perfecting your ability to manipulate people through emotional appeals, guilt trips, and carefully crafted lies. You've become a master at reading people's emotional weaknesses and exploiting them for your own gain. Your entire identity depends on your ability to control the narrative and bend reality to fit your needs. Then along comes someone who simply doesn't participate in your game. They listen to your sob story with complete emotional detachment. They ask for evidence when you make dramatic claims. They point out logical inconsistencies in your explanations. They refuse to be swayed by your tearful persuasion. They treat your emotional manipulation tactics, your anger, or your attempts at intimidation, like a scientist examining bacteria under a microscope, completely unmoved by the performance. This creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance on steroids for the narcissist. Their entire toolkit becomes useless. It's like showing up to a gunfight with a water balloon. Every technique that has worked for them in the past suddenly fails spectacularly, and they're left exposed and vulnerable in a way they rarely experience. Let's break down the specific reasons why this dynamic is so devastating for narcissists. First, logical people operate from a place of internal validation rather than external approval. Narcissists are masters at identifying and exploiting people's need for acceptance, love, and social belonging. They use these needs as leverage points to gain control over their victims. But logical thinkers, especially INTJ, have developed strong internal compass systems that don't require constant external validation to function. When a narcissist tries their usual tactics of withholding approval, threatening abandonment, or offering conditional love as rewards for compliance, the logical person simply doesn't take the bait. They're not seeking the narcissist's approval in the first place, so these manipulation attempts fall flat. It's like trying to threaten someone with taking away something they never wanted. Second, logical people have an almost supernatural ability to spot inconsistencies and contradictions. Narcissists rely heavily on their ability to rewrite history, gaslight their victims, and create alternate versions of reality that serve their purposes. They might claim they never said something they clearly said, or insist that events happened differently than they actually did. These tactics work brilliantly on emotionally reactive people who doubt their own memories when faced with confident assertions from the narcissist. But logical thinkers keep mental notes. They remember details. They notice when stories don't add up. They have this annoying habit of asking questions like, "But didn't you say the opposite thing last week?" Or, "Can you help me understand how both of these statements can be true at the same time?" They approach the narcissist's lies like a detective examining evidence, methodically poking holes in the fabricated narrative until the whole thing collapses. Third, logical people refuse to engage in emotional escalation. Narcissists are experts at creating chaos and drama as a way to control situations and manipulate outcomes. They'll start fights, create crises, and manufacture emergencies to keep everyone around them off balance and reactive. When people are emotional and reactive, they're much easier to manipulate and control. The logical chaos is absolutely infuriating to the narcissist. Instead of getting pulled into the drama, they step back and observe it clinically. They might say something like, "I notice you're very upset right now. Let's revisit this conversation when you're feeling calmer and we can discuss the actual facts." This response completely deflates the narcissist's strategy and leaves them flailing around in their own manufactured drama without an audience to perform for. Fourth, logical people ask the questions that narcissists desperately don't want to answer. They have this tendency to cut through emotional manipulation and get straight to the heart of matters. They'll ask things like, "What specific evidence do you have to support that claim?" Or, "What would it look like if you were wrong about this?" These questions force the narcissist to either admit they don't have rational justification for their position or expose the flawed logic underlying their demands. INTJ are particularly skilled at this because they naturally think in terms of systems and structures. They can quickly identify the weak points in someone's argument and focus their questions on those vulnerabilities. They're not trying to be mean or difficult. They're simply trying to understand how things actually work. But to a narcissist whose entire worldview is built on fantasy and manipulation, these questions feel like existential threats. The narcissist's hatred of logical people goes even deeper than tactical frustration. It strikes at their core identity and self-concept. Narcissists have constructed elaborate internal narratives about their own intelligence, wisdom, and superiority. They see themselves as master manipulators who can read people like books and control situations with their superior understanding of human psychology. When they encounter someone who sees through their tactics effortlessly, who remains completely unmoved by their best manipulation attempts, and who asks questions they can't answer satisfactorily, it creates a crack in their grandiose self-image. Suddenly, they're not the smartest person in the room. Manipulator they're not the master believed themselves to be. They're exposed as someone whose entire skill set is actually quite limited and ineffective against certain types of people. This realization is absolutely devastating for someone whose entire sense of self-worth depends on maintaining an image of superiority and control. The logical person becomes a mirror that reflects back their actual limitations rather than the inflated image they've created of themselves. And narcissists absolutely cannot tolerate this kind of honest reflection. The situation becomes even more complex when we consider how logical people, particularly INTJ, handle conflict and confrontation. Most people, when faced with a narcissist's rage or manipulation, will either fight back emotionally or retreat in fear. Both of these responses actually feed the narcissist's system. Emotional fighting gives them the drama they crave and allows them to paint themselves as the victim. Fearful retreat confirms their power and control over others. But logical thinkers respond in a way that completely short-circuits this dynamic. They remain eerily calm in the face of narcissistic rage. They don't take the bait when the narcissist tries to provoke an emotional response. Instead, they might say something like, "I can see this is important to you, but I'm going to need you to present your concerns in a more constructive way." This response is like throwing cold water on a fire. It removes all the emotional fuel that the narcissist was counting on to escalate the situation. What's particularly maddening for narcissists is that logical people treat their emotional outbursts as irrelevant information. While everyone else in the room might be walking on eggshells, trying to calm the narcissist down or avoid triggering another explosion, the logical person continues to focus on facts and rational discussion. They effectively communicate that the narcissist's emotional state is their own responsibility and won't be used as a weapon to derail productive conversation. This creates a profound power shift that narcissists find absolutely intolerable. They're accustomed to their emotions being treated as the most important thing in any room. Their anger, their tears, their excitement, their disappointment, all of these emotional states typically become the focal point that everyone else has to navigate around. But logical people refuse to reorganize their behavior around the narcissist's emotional weather patterns. INTJ take this even further because they naturally think in long-term patterns and consequences. While most people get caught up in the immediate drama of dealing with a narcissist's latest crisis or manipulation attempt, INTJ are seeing the bigger picture. They notice recurring patterns of behavior. They predict likely outcomes based on past evidence. They make strategic decisions about their involvement based on rational cost-benefit analysis rather than emotional impulses or social pressure. This big-picture thinking terrifies narcissists because it means their short-term manipulation tactics are being evaluated within a larger context of their overall behavioral patterns. The narcissist might think they're being clever by creating a crisis to distract from their previous bad behavior. But the INTJ sees this as just another data point in a consistent pattern of chaos creation and responsibility avoidance. The logical person might say something like, "I notice this is the third time this month you've had an emergency right when we were supposed to discuss your commitments from last week. I'm starting to see a pattern here. This kind of pattern recognition and direct communication about behavioral trends is absolutely devastating to narcissists who rely on people treating each incident in isolation rather than seeing the connected web of manipulation." Another crucial aspect of why narcissists hate logical people involves their relationship with truth and reality. Narcissists exist in a constant state of cognitive flexibility when it comes to facts. They'll adjust their version of events, their stated beliefs, and their proclaimed values based on whatever serves their immediate needs. This requires everyone around them to either participate in this flexible relationship with truth or at least pretend not to notice the contradictions. Logical people, especially INTJ, have an almost compulsive need for internal consistency and coherence. They can't simply ignore obvious contradictions or pretend that mutually exclusive statements are both true. When a narcissist says one thing on Monday and the opposite thing on Wednesday, the logical person will absolutely point this out. Not to be difficult or confrontational, but because unresolved contradictions create genuine cognitive discomfort for them. This puts the narcissist in an impossible position. They can't admit they were wrong or lying because that would damage their grandiose self-image. But they also can't provide a rational explanation for the contradiction because none exists. They're forced to either double down on obviously false statements or resort to increasingly desperate manipulation tactics to avoid addressing the logical inconsistency. The narcissist might try to turn this into an emotional issue by saying something like, "You're being too rigid," or "You're obsessed with being right," or "You're trying to make me look bad." But logical people see right through these deflection attempts. They recognize that pointing out contradictions isn't about being right or making anyone look bad. It's about maintaining a coherent understanding of reality that allows for meaningful communication and relationship. Perhaps most importantly, logical people operate from a fundamentally different value system than narcissists. While narcissists prioritize image management, social positioning, and emotional manipulation as their primary tools for navigating the world, logical people value accuracy, consistency, and genuine understanding. These competing value systems create inevitable conflict because they represent completely different approaches to human interaction and problem solving. When a logical person asks probing questions or points out inconsistencies, they're operating from a genuine desire to understand the situation accurately so they can respond appropriately. When a narcissist deflects questions or creates emotional chaos, they're operating from a desperate need to maintain control and avoid accountability. These motivations are so fundamentally different that meaningful compromise becomes nearly impossible. The narcissist interprets the logical person's quest for accuracy as a personal attack because their entire identity is built on maintaining certain fictions about themselves and their relationships. The logical person experiences the narcissist's emotional manipulation and reality distortion as genuine obstacles to understanding and connection. Neither party can achieve their core objectives, while the other is operating from their preferred framework. This dynamic explains why narcissists will often become obsessed with proving that logical people are somehow flawed or inferior. They'll launch elaborate campaigns to demonstrate that the logical person is cold, unfeeling, socially inept, or missing some crucial aspect of human experience. They desperately need to reframe the logical person's strengths as weaknesses, because acknowledging those strengths would require admitting their own limitations. The tragedy is that this obsession with discrediting logical people often becomes self-defeating for narcissists. The more energy they spend trying to prove that logic and rationality are somehow inferior to emotional manipulation, the more they reveal their own dependence on irrational tactics and their fear of honest evaluation. So there you have it. The reason narcissists hate logical people, especially INTJ, isn't because they're naturally antagonistic or cruel. It's because logical thinkers represent everything narcissists fear most about themselves and the world around them. They fear exposure, they fear accountability, and they fear being seen for who they really are, beneath all the carefully constructed masks and manipulations. If you're a logical person who's been targeted by narcissistic rage, understand that their hatred isn't really about you. It's about what you represent. You're a mirror reflecting back their limitations, their inconsistencies, and their fundamental inability to operate in a world governed by truth rather than manipulation. For those dealing with narcissists in your life, Remember that you don't have to participate in their emotional games. You can maintain your logical approach, ask your probing questions, and refuse to accept contradictory information without feeling guilty about it. Your commitment to rationality and consistency isn't a character flaw that needs fixing. It's a strength that protects you from manipulation and helps create genuine, authentic relationships with people who value truth over drama. The beautiful thing about understanding this dynamic is that it gives you power. When you know why narcissists react so violently to logical thinking, you can protect yourself more effectively and avoid getting pulled into their chaotic world of manufactured crises and emotional manipulation. Like, share, and subscribe if you felt this, and drop a red heart in the comments to let the rest of us know you're watching.